Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Mythic Dungeon International here. Starting it up with series number 4 of the night. We're going into Black Mamba versus Full Send here. I'm Jack, and joining me on the desk is Zyronic, Nagura, and Sours here. So, big game 4 going to be coming up here as we're seeing the first team from the APAC region going to be represented here. Of course, the Eastern region is merging together, China, Taiwan, Korea, and of course, Asia Pacific here. So, it's going to be important to see who is going to be winning up in this matchup here. First game of the day for these guys is going to be on Temple of Sethralus, Sours.
Yeah, we saw this dungeon a little bit earlier. It's a little brutal. Like the bursting is kind of bad, right? Don't get me wrong. We talked about it. It slows them down. It really limits some of the pools, but quaking. My
favorite.
Quaking is a really crazy affix, especially together with bursting. It can really sour any good pool.
Ooh, really?
That's right.
You can be so unlucky too, right, with quaking, especially on top of bursting. If you have a lot of stacks and then you get a very unlucky timing with quaking, then that could be trouble.
We really saw that pressure point, as you mentioned, Nagura, going into that second boss room for Merekta, having to deal with all of the trash you're going to be pulling in together, having the explosions, the bursting going off with it, making sure you're not standing on top of each other here. Now, Zyronic, we saw that really popular first pull coming out, and very high aggression here. Do you think that's what we're going to be seeing the same from as we're going back into these mirror comps?
Yeah, I feel like that's just the typical pull that we've seen almost every single team that does Temple of Sethralus do. You go in, you pull your first reaping wave of trash pretty much, blow your bloodlust, because this dungeon is fortified. It's not that difficult to deal with the bosses, so you don't need your bloodlust for the bosses. And they're just dealing with it very efficiently with the bloodlust. That is a very dangerous pack to deal with without bloodlust, so they just kind of have to use it there.
Yeah, and when we're looking at some of the first bosses, it's not going to be a large threat that they have to really deal with. And I think the only thing, Nagura, there's going to be some of the jolt casts coming off while Lightning Shield is up or something like that. Otherwise, it shouldn't be too deadly.
Yeah, it could be scary because of those casts, especially because, you have a full melee comp, so interrupting those jolt casts, not that easy. You have to walk over, you have to interrupt. Sometimes he might be too far away or the boss is too far. So there can be some dangerous moments, but without Grievous, just having this bursting, which doesn't really affect you in a boss fight, right? It should be easy for those teams.
Dodging Grievous, I know the feeling since we're in it on live servers here, but poll results coming in. Black Mamba at 78% here, so looking like the crowd favorite going into this. This is going to be game 1 between Black Mamba and Full Send here on the Temple of Sethralus.
No support for the APAC team? Wow.
Yeah, Twitch hates APAC. That's toxic. All right, going to the Temple of Sethralus here.
Yeah, so Temple we've seen before. Both teams that we've seen before actually made a couple of mistakes. So we'll see how these two teams play against each other. But I'm actually a bit disappointed because Black Mamba was playing some different setups in the time trials. They had a Blood Deacon, 1 dungeon, and they had a Mage in Waycrest. So now, of course, pulling out the normal comp as we've seen. But maybe there's some surprises later on.
No, we just see them doing a slight variation. They're actually going past the normal. Okay, they're pulling it down now. They were kind of standing there. It didn't look like they were doing the same pull, but they are doing the very same pull where they pull all of the first reaping wave trash pack down on the side of Black Mamba there. And we've seen this exact same pull from every team here. Why is it so dangerous for these teams?
Yeah, so there's a bunch of mobs that are dangerous. Not only is there the Fangs that are stealth, right? If they come out, they will stun you, which is dangerous, especially if it hits the wrong target. As we see, the rogue just dropped really low there. And on top of that, of course, we have the bursting hitting everybody. There's a lot of casters that you need to interrupt. And then we have the marksman with the power shot, too.
Right, in addition to that, also the Crawlist will always target a ranged player, and the only ranged player in the group is the healer. So if that healer is getting perma-stunned by the Crawlists, they don't get to heal the group. And in this small space with this quaking and bursting scenario, the healer has to be able to constantly cast. So it's just a very difficult pull in general for a lot of these groups to pull off. That's why we see them all using their bloodlust there.
Yeah, we do see a really good handling of the bursting affix here, though, by Black Mamba. We've seen only 2 or 3 stacks, and they're waiting until the stacks drop off, then they kill the next trash. So very good from the DPS here of Black Mamba, and they're on their way to pull the boss now.
Yeah, moving right on to Adaris and Aspects here. This is just a 2-phase boss. Essentially, each boss has their own set of mechanics, and you only deal with one boss at a time depending on which boss has the lightning shield on it.
Yeah, so at the moment they're fighting Adaris while Aspects has the lightning shield. Now, when Aspects has the lightning shield on, then he constantly casts his jolt ability, as you've seen him cast, and none of them actually are interrupting it. So they don't have an interrupt rotation for Aspects, and we've seen a lot of people drop very, very low because of these dangerous combos that are coming out here with the static shock, which does a lot of damage, and just constant AoE damage with the quaking as well. So not interrupting those jolt casts is actually a very risky strat by them here.
And of course, the main mechanic that you have to deal with for Aspix is also his Wind Rush ability, where he targets each player in the group. As you see the arrows on the ground right now, he snapshots that area, the entire group moves away, and he will rush, dealing damage to anyone who's still in those arrows. So dealing with both of the main mechanics of the fight, very generously there, very well done by them. And of course, we've mentioned the Lightning Shield. We didn't mention what it does. If you hit the target that has the Lightning Shield, you take reflected damage every single time you deal damage to the target that has the Lightning Shield. So fast-hitting abilities like I-Beam or even the spinning crane kick will do so much damage, so you have to be very careful not to hit the Lightning Shield target.
Yeah, one more ability here from Adaris is the Arcing Light, which is pretty much an AoE around the boss. It does split damage, so you have to try to have your whole team actually stack up. And we see the rest of it actually just barely survive here, as he got the Circle cast, which does a lot of single target damage, which is not avoidable. And then we saw the Static Shock come out, but he went into bear form, used his defenses, and actually just managed to survive barely.
Now, we do see a slight variation on the normal pull pattern for most groups coming into this dungeon. Usually we'll see groups pop their first Reaping Wave right before this boss, but neither of the groups did that. Actually, both groups on exactly 16% here. So we'll have to see what they plan on doing with their first Reaping Wave right after they deal with this boss.
Yeah, so a different pull coming out from both of those teams, but interesting to see that both of them are doing the same thing. So both of them the exact same percentage. Now, Black Mamba is a little bit behind when it comes to the boss, as Full Send is about to finish off Aspix here, and then they're going to move on and probably going to trigger the Reaping after this hallway here, unless they want to Shadow Melt it, which could work too, right? They could finish off some trash here to proc the Reaping, then move on and just Shadow Melt, right?
Yeah, it's kind of weird. Usually what we'll see teams do here is we'll see them just shroud right pretty much to the second boss's room or to the bridge right before the first boss's room, but
yeah,
they can't. It's just kind of a weird variation. I mean, we've seen so many teams do that first strategy, and it's worked out so well for them, so it's kind of weird. It'll just be really interesting to see what they'll do here. Now, they do end up pulling this Crawler Strider. It looks like what happened is they shrouded there. Two people were on top of each other with Quaking, which bursts them out of the invisibility, and they got aggro on it, unfortunately.
Yeah, you have to be very careful with Quaking when you're trying to shroud. Now, thankfully, they do have two rogues, right? So they can, I believe they Shadow Melted the Rider and just use their second shroud. But now again, they got that Quaking, which is just so dangerous. They need to make sure that before you use the shroud, even if it costs you time, if Quaking is about to come up, you just need to wait. You need to wait until it comes out, then shroud just to be safe and go over. Else, those things are going to happen. And they actually ninja pulled another trash group here on Black Mamba's side.
Yeah, the first trash pull I don't think is too big of a deal. Usually we'll see the people, we'll usually see groups pull those two snakes down the bridge as well as the rider. But the two marksmen, they definitely did not mean to pull. That was just sloppy play from them in general. On the side of Full Send, we also saw them shroud past both of the same packs here, and they are doing a similar pull.
Yeah, so the problem with Black Mamba now is if it actually was ninja pull, which I believe that they did intend to pull it, then now the whole route is going to be different. Now, the problem with having a different route, which they can probably figure out a skip later on to not go over percentage, but the problem is that the reaping timers are going to be different. So a ninja pull like that will actually change their route a lot, and it might mess it up, and they might have completely different timing, something they haven't practiced for.
Yeah, usually we'll see groups kind of like set up the reaping wave by getting to 78, 58, something right below that 20% reaping proc marker, and then they'll do a pull where they'll proc it and then pull the reaping into the next boss or the next wave and make sure that they actually deal with it perfectly. This just kind of messes all that up, like you mentioned. They'll have to either like skip some trash, which you can't do in this boss room. You have to pull all of the trash in this next boss room, otherwise you don't spawn the boss. Or they'll have to skip something between now and the third boss, which would just kind of mess up your pull pattern for the entire dungeon. So that's just really unfortunate that happened to them.
Definitely. Now we see Black Mamba spawn their reaping wave here, and I guess they don't really know what to do now. They're pretty much killing the reaping wave by themselves without like any additional mobs, which is of course very inefficient because I assume this was just not planned by them. Now, I'm not sure if they want to do a bigger pull and just continue how they planned it, because otherwise they probably would have pulled it back into the reaping.
Now, of course, moving into the second boss room of Merektha here, the main mechanics to look out for are this Krolist Rider. This is one of the most dangerous tank damage mobs in the instance. They do a very large amount of tank damage. They have a frontal AoE breath that they need to make sure none of them get hit by, as we see the warrior sidestepping him there. And when he gets to 50%, he will jump off and still do massive tank damage, but they won't have that frontal breath anymore.
Yeah, on Full Send side, we do see some smaller pulls. As Cyrus mentioned earlier, they actually said that they didn't really practice a lot. Now, if that is actually true, we'll see. But Full Send playing a lot cleaner here, having, don't really having any missteps. I don't think they ninja pulled anything, so good on them. But again, they're just going slower, so that will cost them time overall compared to the bigger pulls that Black Mamba is pulling out here.
And of course, the other two mobs in this room that they'll have to deal with are the Faithless Tenders, which are the main healing mobs. They heal themselves, they heal a single target. In addition to that, the Crazed Incubators will explode upon reaching 20% HP, which is incredibly dangerous for these melee comps. They need to make sure they get out of that explosion radius. Full Send has now procced their second Reaping Wave, and it doesn't look like they're pulling it with anything. They're just killing it solo. I do see one Crazed Incubator in there, but nothing too crazy from them.
Yeah, definitely going pretty slow on Full Send side, while Black Mamba is still behind percentage-wise, probably because of that misstep earlier, because of doing the reaping without anything else. But now they have a pretty substantial pull coming in this room. I do believe they pulled all of the rest of the mobs in this room, so they have a lot of tenders. Now, pulling so many tenders is of course difficult because you need a lot of interrupts. You have all those poisons around in a group which do a lot of damage on top of the bursting and on top of the quaking. But the healer seems to be handling it pretty well.
Yeah, in addition to that, they can deal with the Drain Cast. Actually, we do see a Drain Cast going off on that one tender there, so no, he has now healed himself and buffed himself with a cooldown reduction, which will make him be able to cast more healers. Also, they're dropping incredibly low to these bursting stacks here. Will their healer be able to heal them out of it? It looks like
the Tree of Life.
Fine. Yeah, he popped the Tree of Life there just to make sure his group stays alive there. I'm not sure if that was planned or if that was just kind of like a, in the moment cooldown. They're still dropping incredibly low from these bursting stacks.
Yeah, they also extended this last bursting stack at the very, very last second, so the healer had a hard time healing it up. Thankfully, he managed to get a drink off here. He was pretty low on mana, but right before they pulled the boss, he managed to get it off combat, managed to get a fast drink off, and of course, they did trigger the Reaping Wave in the middle of this all. I do believe they Shadow Melded it because I didn't see a lot of Reaping Heads here, but now they're fighting the boss, which, we didn't really see any teams having a lot of trouble with this boss unless he get hit by the Blinding Sand.
Yeah, of course, the only real dangerous phase in this fight is the last phase. It is a 3-phase encounter with 2 intermissions. Once you get to 70%, the first intermission will spawn 4 of these snakes that you need to deal with before the boss respawns. Of course, during this entire time, the boss is tunneling around the room, which will do damage if you get by the tunnel. It'll take 2 passes through the middle of the arena, and if you get hit by them, you actually take a ton of damage.
Yeah, we actually have a nice point of view here of Black Mamba jumping up on one of those eggs and pulling the Nimbus. Now, you have to find the correct angle to actually be able to pull it through, else you're going to be line of sight. And there we go. He did manage to pull the Nimbus. Now they're going to fight it in the second phase, which is probably the least scariest phase out of all, since there's no frontal cone, there's no breath, so you don't have to position yourself properly. All you have to do is turn around for the Blinding Sand.
Now, we did mention earlier one of the biggest problems with this dungeon is going to be that quaking. Now, if we do have a very unfortunate quaking with the AoE cast from the Nimbus, we can see people dropping incredibly low here, maybe even dying if they're stacked on top of each other for the quaking damage. Moving into the second intermission here, we have 4 new snakes, but these ones also drop LOS zones on the ground, so if anything's standing inside that cloud, you won't be able to do any damage to it, you won't be able to CC it. Just kind of a pain. We do see 2 people dropping incredibly low on the side of Black Mamba there, but it looks like they're just getting out of it cleanly.
Yeah, they actually, as we can see, those clouds in the middle, they're not supposed to come out because the cast where they spawn the clouds is actually interruptible by stuns and by knockbacks. So they probably have a setup rotation with AoE stuns from the Windwalker, knockbacks from the Druid and the Ring of Peace, but they probably messed up one of the rotations and they just had the clouds coming through. And that is very dangerous because if you have those clouds down and you just miss all of your abilities, and the snakes are going to be up for longer, especially on top of the Nimbus, but they did manage to recover here.
And we see both of these groups moving into the final phase of the boss at roughly the same time. This is the most dangerous part of the fight. You can see that Blinding Sand coming out from Erecta there. If you are facing the boss, you will get disoriented for a number of seconds and be unable to help your group until that debuff goes away. Fortunately, it looks like nobody got disoriented, and both groups are dealing with the boss very well.
Well, Full Send actually had the whole room full of green pools on the floor, so definitely didn't do a very good job at baiting their breath to the side of the room, but they did manage to kill a boss without any casualties, so they're gonna move forward. We actually see them having the Nimbus up still, so they didn't pull the Nimbus through the LOS as we've seen on Black Mamba's side, meaning they are gonna lose quite a bit of time by pretty much soloing this Nimbus here.
And this is one of the biggest point of contentions that we saw in this dungeon. The biggest differences we saw from clean pulls in this group. Do they pull all of the Dervi together? Or do they pull them in two separate packs? We saw on the side of Black Mamba, they're pulling all of them together with their Bloodlust. This is incredibly low. I'm not sure if his Tree of Life cooldown is back up from when he popped it before Marektha here. It is up, yet he does have it popped there, so they should be safe. But this is incredibly dangerous. If any of these AoE pulses get off during a Quaking and they're not spread out for the Quaking AoE damage, anybody can go down here. It looks like they also have a Nimbus in there for even more AoE group damage. This is just an incredibly dangerous pull.
Yeah, this is a huge pull coming in. We see the Quaking just end on top of the bursting, just dropping everybody so low. Now the Tree of Life is actually gone, and we see the Rest Druid go down. This means they don't have a battle rest here. They need to finish this pull without actually proccing. They can't proc the Reaping, right? So, okay, we see him release, so he needs to go back really quickly. He does have stealth, so he's going to manage to get back. But no one can die here while the healer is gone, because now they actually proc the Reaping, and now they need to be very careful while the healer is gone.
Now, something very important to mention here is that those static dervishes don't actually typically deal with the mechanics of the dungeon. As you know, they react very weirdly depending on what the affixes for the dungeon are. So that's why when you saw the dervishes die there and there were no bursting stacks going out, the healer dies once again, pulling more of the Reaping down to the group here.
Okay, this was a big problem because the healer was releasing. Of course, they don't have a battle rest and we see the tank going down too. So this is a disaster for Black Mamba. They are going to have a full wipe here, I believe. Now, the problem was that all of those Reaping mobs, they attacked the Rest Druid while he was trying to walk back, putting him out of stealth. And they skipped some of the mobs, meaning that he couldn't walk past them. So he tried to walk past anyway, pulling those mobs with him, but he died on the way. And now the tank died, so they have to kill those Reaping mobs on the back end. And they pretty much just split up. Their whole group is split up, and now they have to try to recover.
Yeah, the only way they can really recover here is if they use a Shroud or some sort of invisibility potion to get back up to the group to deal with the rest of these Reaping mobs. So while we did see them almost pull that big pull off, it also ended up being 3 deaths for them, as well as having to deal with the rest of these Reaping mobs, while we see Full Send is slowly chugging away through the dungeon cleanly, crisply, not doing it with any sort of flash, but they're making sure that they deal with everything without dying.
They have 2 people dying again from the Quaking on top of just the AoE damage coming in. The tank also dropping very, very low, just dealing with those Reaping ads, really. So they're having a lot of problems here to recover from this failed pull, pretty much. Now, we talked about this earlier. This is a very difficult pull to pull off, especially with those dervishes just doing this AoE, Quaking, and bursting on top of that. And it's a risk-reward kind of thing, right? They probably didn't know what Full Send, what kind of strategy they're going to pull out. Now, if Full Send does the same pull, this risky pull, and they pull it off, then they have to do it as well. But if they actually knew that Full Send is doing just smaller pulls and safer pulls, they could have done the same thing and just, be faster. But just doing this risky pull and not, it just didn't work out for them here.
And once again, just more time lost there. They had to spend time casting a res on the Windwalker Monk instead of him releasing and running back with the group. Probably because he couldn't make it past the pack without a Shroud, which they need for later in the dungeon, but just more time loss. The important thing to remember here is that they used their Bloodlust on that pull that went horribly, while Full Send just gets to use their Bloodlust on this boss here. Now, looking at Galvast here, it's just it's one of those kind of pass-fail mechanic bosses. You need to make sure you're soaking each of these pillars in a 3-man or a 4-man rotation. If any of the pillars hits the boss, he gains energy, and if he hits 100 energy, he explodes, doing massive damage to the entire group. So this is just kind of like a handoff mechanic. People need to make sure that they're soaking pillar in turn.
Yeah, this is a very heavy AoE damage boss, very difficult on the healer, but it is 45, so of course a little bit easier for the healer to deal with it here. Now the problem is, of course, Quaking again. Quaking, if someone is really low and then on top of that you get Quaking, as we can see one of the rogues is being so low here, then it can be very dangerous, but because they did have the Bloodlust, it seems very safe for them here.
Yeah, and also both of the rogues, neither of them have proc cheat death yet, so they're just in an incredibly safe position. Using that Bloodlust on this probably most dangerous boss in the dungeon is going to be very, very fruitful for them moving forward. Now, they are only 25% or so ahead on the boss compared to Black Mamba, but we have to mention that they also have those 5 deaths, adding up to 25 extra seconds on the board, which is going to come into play later in the dungeon.
Yeah, this might still be very close, even though Black Mamba had this one failed pull, this big pull, but as we said, Full Send just doing a little bit of slower pulls, and even though they did have a full wipe, basically, Black Mamba is not that far behind. They're about to kill the boss now, so they only are the 5 deaths behind and a little bit of the boss HP. So if they manage to if they save some time later on, then maybe they're actually going to pull ahead still.
We see them moving on to the end of the bridge, dealing with this mini-boss, the Spark Channel, which is the guy causing those electric sparks to move across the bridge. Of course, you have to deal with him. He'll give you a little bit of extra mob count. Moving into this Orb Room, we see the typical mechanic most groups will deal with is that after they deal with the Spark Channel, they'll have their tank run through the entire room, pick up all the trash, and then they'll have their DPS move through and put the orbs into the skull, allowing them to move on to the final boss in the dungeon.
Just very nice to see that on Black Mamba side, the tank was actually jumping on the druid's back to not fail like any of this lightning. I always actually see the rogue dying here. Probably got hit by one of those sparks. Maybe their mentality is just down now that they had this big wipe, they had their problems. Maybe their mindset is just not not in the right place anymore.
Yeah, but I mean, you can't just give up after one big wipe. You have to have that composure. You know, being in competitions before, you don't know what's going to happen to the other team. There's still plenty of dungeon left. If the other group has a wipe at any point in the dungeon and you're still doing well, you can come back and win the dungeon. So that's just kind of, I hate to think that a team would do that. They would just have one wipe and give up, because that's just kind of defeatist gameplay. I wouldn't want to think they'd do that.
That's definitely something you need to get used to in a competition like that. You definitely can't give up after a wipe like that. But they're back on their feet. They are trying to kill this channeler here. Then again, they're behind, right? Full Send already opened the door. They did put in both of the eyes. They procced the reaping. I believe they also shadow melted it. They're actually doing a little bit of a different skipping here, as we've seen most teams just put in both of the eyes, trigger the reaping, and go all the way to the boss room and shadow melt there. Now we've seen them just shadow melt earlier, and now they're just gonna go and shroud to the boss.
Yeah, you definitely see them standing there together. Looks like they were waiting for a quaking timer, which didn't actually end up coming. Now they can spread out here in between, make sure that nobody gets broken out of stealth there. Very well executed from them, and then just move on past the trash. Once they get to this, they'll have to deal with the 4 hexers here, which kind of just do AoE group damage with a lava burst that can be interrupted. We see some groups deal with these differently. Some groups pulling 2 at a time, some groups pulling all 4. This is definitely the safer way to do it, and they're probably doing this safer because they know they're ahead, because they haven't wiped yet. Just a practice thing for them.
Definitely. So one thing I didn't see it from Shaw here, from the Prod Warrior, is he didn't do the double reflect from the hexers as we've seen some teams do earlier. So a little bit inefficient, or maybe he just doesn't know about it. But they are pulling 2 hexes at a time. Actually, they just keep pulling, so they chain pulling, which is very efficient. If you know, like one hex is gonna die, we're just gonna pull the next one. They just focus one of them down, so they pretty much just can keep chain pulling and just be a little bit faster like that.
Yeah, and we do see this it's a little bit of a variation from the last time we saw Temple earlier today, where they actually are planning on getting the rest of the percentage from having the boss buff and then pulling the rest of the trash that they just skipped into the boss with them, which I believe is the more efficient way of doing the dungeon, because you get to take full advantage of that massive damage and damage reduction debuff. Moving on to the Avatar of Sethralus here. It's a 3-phase boss encounter, but it's a little bit different from most bosses.
Yeah, so in this encounter, you actually need to heal them. You see in the middle. And you have these hexes here, as you can see. They're channeling on the boss. So right now, you can't heal the boss. You need to kill all the 4 hexers to be able to heal the boss. You need to heal them to 70% to get into the second phase. And once you kill those 4 hexers, you need to heal them to 100% to get into the last phase, where you get this damage buff and the damage reduction buff, where they're going to end up pulling trash back and get the 100%.
Now, also to mention, there are other mobs in the fight. Aside from the 4 hexers channeling into the boss, there is a Heart Guardian, which deals massive tank damage, putting a debuff on the tank, causing him to take even more damage, which stacks. So if not dealt with quickly, your tank could be in a little bit of trouble there. In addition to that, there are some Plague Doctors, which will hex members in the group if not interrupted, as well as doing Chain Lightning for just extra group damage. Generally, we see groups just kind of cleave the Heart Guardian down while moving around to the 4 hexers. And we're entering the first intermission for Team Full Send here, where you'll see they're healing up the Avatar of Sethralus. Once he reaches 70%, we'll spawn another set of 4 hexers and we'll start it all over again.
Yeah, we see the rest of it for Full Send, actually, either he doesn't have tree for him or he's just not using it for this specific moment. This is a lot to heal, right? You have to heal the Avatar to 70%, which is a lot of healing required. So if you do have this Tree of Life form ready and you do have to innervate, it's just so much faster. So we see on Full Send side, it just took them a little bit long, and this is still pretty close. You also have to consider the Bloodlust timing. Now, Black Mamba has their Bloodlust ready in 30 seconds, while Full Send is not going to get their Bloodlust back up. Now, the problem is, of course, still that the 6 death time difference is still just 30 seconds, right? So not only do you need to beat them, they also need to be 30 seconds faster.
Right, that's the biggest thing coming into the end of this dungeon here. Now, we do see Full Send dealing with the last couple of hexers here on their side in this dungeon. We do see the Windwalker monk going down, so that is going to be an extra 5 seconds that Black Mamba will have coming back. but they still have 2 battle reses on the side of Full Send. It'll take a pretty catastrophic wipe here to cause them to lose this dungeon.
Definitely. And then in the last phase, as I said, it's very difficult to wipe it all because you have this huge buff that reduces the damage taken on all your members. We see the Bloodlust actually getting popped on Black Mamba's side here to finish up those last Hexers and heal the boss to get into the last phase. But Full Send just a little bit ahead still.
Yeah, I mean, this is looking really close together, and if we didn't have those deaths, it would be a lot more hype, be a lot more closer. But I think those death timers, that one full wipe coming out of Black Mamba is really going to be the deal that seals this dungeon here. We see them dealing with the last Hexer on the side of Black Mamba there to go into the second intermission phase. We still have, I believe, 2 Hexers on the side of Full Send. Or maybe actually it looks like they're just dealing with the last one right now. So these teams are going to be going into the second intermission at the exact same time here. But once again, the deaths are going to ruin it for Team Black Mamba.
And actually dropped very low here. So one thing to notice about is those toads, as you can see them walk around in this area, they usually will have aggro on the healer, will have aggro for healing, and if they actually reach a player, they will explode and leave a disease behind, which reduces your healing done. Now the problem here on Full Send side is their healer is actually completely out of mana, so it's going to take him so long to heal the boss up, but he does have his Innervate ready right now, as we can see him cast it on himself, so he will have the window of Innervate to just be able to heal the boss up.
Yeah, it looks like what happened is exactly what you mentioned. Those Plague Frogs hit the healer, causing him to do absolutely no healing to the boss, so they're actually entering this last intermission, this last phase here, about 20 full seconds slower than Black Mamba, so there actually is a chance of them coming back here.
This is definitely super close. We see already Black Mamba being in the very last phase. They do have the buff, they have the damage reduction, they have the damage increase, and we saw them pull the rest of the trash back to the boss. Now it's all gonna be on these death timers, right? It's a 25 seconds difference between those guys. So Black Mamba needs to kill a boss, and then Full Send will have 25 seconds to kill a boss faster than them. But because the healer was and we had those toads coming through, it just cost them so much time.
Yeah, 2 things to mention here. They do need to deal with the 2 Hoodoo Hexers in the back to make sure they kill the boss here. Actually, what they want to do is they want to kill the trash first, because once you kill the Hoodoo Hexer, you lose your big damage and damage reduction debuff. So they want to kill all the trash they need to get 100%, then they want to finish off that last Hexer, which they just now did. We need timer on the clock now here. 25 seconds for Full Send to finish everything off. It looks like they're just finished off the boss there.
Yeah, so we see on Full Send size, they still have a Hoodoo Hexer left. They still have 6% trash left. So now they're only going to have a couple of seconds to finish. Well, they do have 20 seconds, so they're probably going to make it because they do only have 1 Hexer left. So I do believe it's going to go to Full Send side here.
They've got 15 seconds to deal with these 2 Heart Guardians here. They did just lose their damage buff, though. They finished off the boss.
Oh, no, they finished it too early.
They finished the Hoodoo Hexer too early, and the tank is getting low here. They only have 8 seconds to finish these 2 Heart Guardians. One of them goes down. 4 seconds left to finish this Heart Guardian. Can they do it?
They got it.
Oh, yeah, they got it.
Okay.
Oh, wow. That was close.
Jesus, man.
We're going to have to take another look at that just to confirm, but it does look like Full Send was able to get that last mob down there just in time. But we're going to double check. We're going to make sure that we got all that together, because we did want to make sure we double check on those timers, because they look like the timers ticked over a little bit after, of course, those went down. But that was almost a complete throw that Zyronic was talking about. Once you kill that last Hexer, I mean, that's one of the things that we keep on drilling in all the time. Whenever you kill that last Hexer there, you lose your buff. You instantly have, this 90% damage reduction, where you end up having, 5 or 6 stacks of that Heart Guardian, and they just start obliterating them. So great movement by Sean to, jump out of there and try to extend it a little bit more there.
Yeah, if the Warrior died there, it would have been over. There were so many.
Absolutely.
It was that was so close. They didn't have to be that close again.
They had it. They had it in hand, and that was one of the things, even going into the matchup, they were kind of worried. They're like, guys, can you pray for us and watch out for us and everything like that? Right there, as you're seeing.
Yeah, it was just a crazy dungeon. They were so close on the first boss, and everything was looking okay, and then everything was going so good for both these teams, and then it all started to fall apart. The Black Mamba had a huge wipe right before the 3rd boss, and then they just really failed this lightning ball gauntlet, and these silly mistakes that you really can't afford to have happen just kept setting them back further and further behind.
Would be the first time that lightning ball gauntlet has been the end of Sours here. But going back to Sours, let's talk about that little clip that you have for us, that big wipe that just set Black Mamba so far back.
You know me, when I want to get a clip, I want to see a team just kind of fall apart. So
Wow.
we see this
Ruthless.
healer from Black Mamba just kind of, he rotted down during this pool, and these guys don't have a battle res available to them. He sits dead for so long, and then these static charge dervishes are just doing so much damage that the team has no choice but to kill these mobs. Otherwise they don't want to kill them, because killing them, of course, spawns the next reaping wave, and then all of a sudden you've got their healer running back to the group with the reaping wave, and the reaping wave sees stealth, and so he dies again on the run back. So the whole team's all of a sudden, they got to shift way back to kind of get him back to the team. They had so many deaths on this, it was, the whole dungeon just kind of fell apart right there. And then we saw that, after, you said it well, Zyro, that wipe sealed the deal for them. Their kind of mentality was just shattered after that point. They started playing sloppy and kind of slow, and then they lost, I believe they lost by just a couple of seconds at the very end there.
Yeah, we're still checking that out, but it's ironic, as we were talking about it, you can't give up, and you also can't underestimate your opponent's ability to throw the advantage that they have, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's happened many times in the past, especially in my experience. I mean, where we would wipe early in the dungeon, and then we'd be like, well, we're here, we're competing. You got to keep going, because, like you said, the other team can make mistakes too. They're human, so you got to keep going.
In this case, there are also Night Elves, quite a few of them as we're going into it here. But, after seeing some of the difficult pulls, I was kind of curious, Nagura, what your thoughts as coming from Resto Druid standpoint. Often we start seeing Incarnation, Tree of Life, being used for that 4 or 5 pack of Dervi going into that. Did they just not have it available, or did they just kind of just stand in one of the leaps that was coming out there?
Yeah, I'm not completely sure. I think he popped his tree early in the pool, and then when he ended up dying, his tree was already gone. So maybe he just, maybe they were too slow, like they were in practice, or not enough damage, not killing them fast enough. And once this Tree of Life just runs out, you're just missing this big cooldown, and just so much damage coming in on top of quaking and bursting, and he just ran out of gas.
Yep, definitely running out of gas. And as we are seeing the final scores there down at the bottom, we are seeing that Black Mamba was able to pull it out just by a hair there, getting it just before their opponents. And then it's kind of a heartbreaker for Full Send, don't you think, here, Zyro?
Wow, I thought Full Send would actually win. Black Mamba won?
Yeah, Black Mamba actually won by 0.6 seconds.
Wow.
I mean, that's actually really impressive that they managed to have that full wipe, but still pull out ahead and just playing clean for the rest of the dungeon. We saw Full Send on the last boss there. It looks like their healer was probably a combination of both being and getting those Plague Doctor debuffs. Just it was too much time lost for them.
There's a big gravitation that happens a lot of times when you're seeing DPS in that intermission phase. I'm sure you can see it as well, Nagura, where everyone wants to stand on you. Everyone wants to be next to you, and it drives me crazy.
Yeah. So you see all those toads just coming in as, guys, please protect me, right?
And then you get lightning on you, and then you have to move again. And then there's lightning on you, and then there's frogs.
And it's a couple of mistakes coming out of Full Send here, because they pretty much had it, right? But then they killed the Hexer too fast. They didn't have to buff anymore. The healer got hit by toads. Just those small mistakes just adding up, right?
Yep, and that's all it takes really to seal the deal for them. But that was game 1 going in the favor of Black Mamba. So we're going to be seeing game 2 moving on to King's Rest here. Full Send, going to need this one, so don't go anywhere. After a very close Temple of Sethless run between Black Mamba and Full Send, we're moving on to game 2 here, going into King's Rest here with Tyrannical, Raging, and Volcanic. My name's Jack, and joining me on the desk here is Zyronic, Nagura, and Sours here. And guys, we were just talking about it. We haven't really seen a whole lot of Raging thus far here, Sours.
Yeah, Raging King's Rest is really brutal. The first room especially, the mobs enrage, and then they enrage again with Raging, and they really give tanks a hard time. Luckily, teams are running Druids. They've got Soothe. And as long as you have it on your bars, you're going to be a little bit okay.
It's a soothing thing to think about there, Sours. Thank you. And Nagura, as we're going into this, some of the nasty bosses, I mean, the healing intensity that you have to do, the very heavy single target going into the first, second, and third bosses, really, is going to be a lot for the healers to be able to handle, and what we've already seen, so much pressure being put onto them.
Definitely, especially King's Rest. I think it's one of the most difficult dungeons on Tyrannical, right? On the first boss, you just have to debuff the spit on the random people that needs to be healed away. And then on the third, on the council boss, you also have the axe debuff that does so much damage to your team. So Tyrannical, definitely very difficult in King's Rest.
Yeah, we're going to have to watch for that as well, as we are seeing a little comp switch up, a little change coming up in the eastern region here as Tay is moving from his monk to the Frost Mage here. Sours, what are we looking at?
Oh, Frost Mage out of OCE. That's pretty exciting. They need to just kind of chill out a little bit after coming out of that brutal 0.6 second defeat in the last dungeon.
Yeah, diving into King's Rest here. Black Mamba is up 1-0 versus Full Send. In order to keep the APAC dream alive, Send will have to take this one and then take the game 3 that will follow here. So, Tyrannical, Raging, Volcanic in King's Rest.
It's kind of interesting to see that the Full Send is pulling out the Mage, because as I mentioned before, Black Mamba was playing Mage in the time trials in Wakecrest. So now seeing the Mage coming out of Full Send, I haven't seen the Mage at all in the time trials. So I wonder what their strategy is here with this Mage.
Yeah, I have to imagine it has to be some sort of a comfort pick, because I don't really see what the benefits of a Mage over a Windwalker Monk are in this dungeon. Windwalker brings all the utility that we've been talking about for pretty much the entire tournament. The Touch of Death, the Touch of Karma, Ring of Peace, Leg Sweep. I mean, Mage brings us slow, but what kind of kiting are you going to be doing in King's Rest?
Yeah, there isn't really much kiting to be done at all now. We do have the intellect buff. Maybe they just all want to be a little bit smarter.
Yeah, they definitely want to be a little bit smarter, and like Sour said, chill out a little bit after the last dungeon. That was a rough one. Now, we did see last week, we saw some teams doing the entire room with Bloodlust here, but I don't think they're going to be doing that, especially on this Raging affix, because almost all of these things do at least a lot of tank damage or a lot of group damage if any of these casts get off. So it'd be incredibly dangerous and probably a little reckless to pull the entire room on this Raging affix. But other than that, I mean, the other affix that we have in this dungeon is the Volcanic. Now, Volcanic is probably one of the easiest affixes to deal with in general, because all you have to do really is just look at your feet and move out of it.
Yeah.
Now, some people have a problem with that, but generally speaking, hopefully our top 8 teams to qualify wouldn't have too much of an issue doing that.
I hope not. I hope not. No, as you mentioned, the Raging, not only is it difficult because of those Witch Doctors who constantly cast this Deathly Chill, which does a lot of damage on the tank. And of course, there's also the Shadowbolt Volley, which needs to be interrupted. But the problem is there's those champions, right, who have a enrage effect by themselves. So they will sometimes just randomly enrage. Now, this means that the healer needs to choose between dispelling the champion or waiting for an enrage to be dispelled, because of course Soothe, the enrage dispel, does have a pretty long cooldown. So especially when they all drop low at the very same time and all rage at the very same time, you have to be very careful in which one you dispel.
Yeah, and I can only imagine the only thing that they'd really be bringing the Frost Mage for is for kiting enraged mobs. That's probably the real only advantage I can see to the Frost Mage here, which is kind of countered to the Ring of Peace that we see for kiting on the side of groups that bring monks. So it's definitely, it's got to be a comfort pick in my opinion, just looking at the way they're playing right now, because the Mage kind of isn't really doing that much damage.
Yeah, maybe it's just a saver pick, just, you know, maybe, as we mentioned before, Full Send pretty much said they just didn't practice those dungeons a lot. They just didn't have the time, they didn't want to put in the time. I'm not sure what exactly happened, but, you know, maybe it's a comfort pick. Maybe it's because of the Raging, as you said, just being safer, just, you know, just lean back and just do smaller pulls, play safer, and hope that Black Mamba makes those mistakes again, as in the first dungeon. I mean, Full Send almost pulled that one off.
And we do see both groups doing essentially the same pull pattern, splitting it up into 2 different groups and pulling that first Reaping Wave into the boss, while also committing their first Bloodlust to this boss. Now, looking at the Golden Serpent as a boss, this is an incredibly healing-intensive boss, especially on Tyrannical. The boss will, at random, target players with a golden debuff, and after that golden debuff expires, it spawns a pool of gold on the ground, at which point the boss will occasionally summon these golds. And we do see the healer go down on the side of Black Mamba, and they have no way of battle raising. This is just going to be a full wipe for them right off the bat. This
is a disaster for Black Mamba here. They have to do a full wipe. As you mentioned, they just don't have a battle rest for the druid. It's the only person with a battle rest is the healer. So if the healer goes down, they have to do a full wipe. There's no engineering on a tournament realm, so they lose a lot of time here. Not only do they lose, of course, the 5 deaths with the timers, 25 seconds, but they also lose their Bloodlust and all their offensive cooldowns, which means they have to play this boss now without Bloodlust. Now, if the healer didn't really manage to heal the boss with Bloodlust, so how is it going to work out for them if they don't have this Bloodlust? And this is a difficult fight in Tyrannical.
Well, I mean, looking at the group comp, I mean, the healer is probably the worst person for the debuff to go on here, because I mean, they can heal themselves pretty well, but if you look at the group comp they have with 2 rogues and a monk, they have so many personal cooldowns to use with that to reduce the damage of the gold debuff. I mean, going on the healer like that is, and if they don't have skin up, they just die, like what we saw happen there.
Yeah, maybe he played a little bit too greedy, because of course Rasta druids do have bark skin and iron bark, so they have 2 cooldown they have 2 big cooldowns defensives that they can use on themselves. Maybe he just figured, I don't need it, I can heal this. And then he just, by a slither of HP, he did, he miscalculated and just died to 1 tick of this debuff, and it's disastrous for them. Now, of course, on Full Send side, they're doing a pretty good job. Now those buffs though, you need to be very, very careful with them, because if they end up reaching the boss, he will get a really big absorb shield, pretty much just wiping the group, and it will also increase the damage done of the boss. So it just pretty much means that you're gonna wipe. So maybe that's also one reason why they have this mage, because mages can actually deal with them very, very well.
Yeah, they do deal with them very efficiently with their blizzard. It reduces the cooldown of their frozen orb in addition to slowing the golds on the ground. So the mage kind of gets to deal with the gold all on their own, and we can see the benefit that it gives them. He's actually doing quite a bit of damage on this boss. He's not quite keeping up with the well-rolled outlaw rogue, but he's still doing very good damage on this boss, and it allows the rogues to pretty much spend full time on the boss. Now we do see Golden Serpent going down for Full Send here, and we see Black Mamba is still at 50% because of that full wipe.
Yeah, we saw on Full Send side, their Restored actually was pretty much out of mana at the very end of the fight, and they did have the Bloodlust. So Black Mamba will struggle a bit without this Bloodlust, without the cooldowns coming in. Maybe the healer is running out of cooldowns, running out of mana, so they definitely have a hard time killing this boss. But on Full Send side, we see them getting to this event. Now on this event, on the Tournament Realm, there's actually a fixed spawns for these trash groups. There's 4 different trash groups. On live servers, it will be random which one spawns first, but on the Tournament Realm, it will always start top left and then go counterclockwise.
Right now, and we are seeing another variation from last week's polls. Actually, no, they're just coming in now. I was going to say, we saw teams pull both of these animated guardians from the front of the dungeon and pull them into this group, so there's no downtime. This whole room has a lot of RP, so you kind of have to wait for the different sets of groups to spawn, and so pulling these 2 guardians in allows you to work towards getting more mob count while waiting for things to spawn. We did see one of the rogues' cheat deaths get used on the side of Full Send there, so we'll have to keep an eye on him later. He might go down because of not having that cooldown available to him later on. And also on the side of Black Mamba, we did see their Windwalker monk go down, so they had to use their battle raise there.
Yeah, you see on the side of Full Send, this pull is pretty dangerous, especially because of those frontal cones. And as you mentioned, one of the rogues proccing his cheat death because he did get hit by this frontal cone. And not only does it do a lot of damage if you get it, it stuns you, right? So you might just get hit by 1 stun, and then the other guardian just stuns you again, just doing so much damage, just pretty much being stuck in this cycle of just constantly being stunned. So definitely pretty dangerous to pull these golems on top as we see them going on to the next group here.
Yeah, this next group is probably one of the most dangerous ones of all 4 of them. There's a lot of things to deal with here. This Axe Barrage will put a massive physical bleed debuff on everyone in the group, which is something that you really have to watch out for when he goes into that raging 100% increased damage below 30% health here. But other than that, there's a heal that you have to interrupt, and it's just the Axe Barrage really that they have to look out for.
Yeah, thankfully it's tyrannical, so we see some strategies coming in to pretty much avoid this Axe Barrage. We see them either stunning it to delay it and then everybody going line of sight, because if you're line of sight, you're actually not getting hit by it. But we see them just, not wasting any damage by going line of sight, just taking it because it is tyrannical and just trusting their healer to heal it away pretty much.
Yeah, we did kind of see them kill the other 2 mobs off and wait for the cast at around 40% so that they wouldn't get the full raging debuff off. But that did proc their second Reaping Wave, and it looks like they are planning on pulling that into the next spawn, which is the Queen and the King.
Yeah, so this Queen is casting a Shadow Bolt this whole time. They're constantly casting. Now, you do want to interrupt it because it does do a lot of damage to your tank. And now, of course, we have the King that just, you see him whirlwind around. So he will target a random player and pretty much Blade Storm towards this player. Now, there's no real indicator when he will start Blade Storm, so it's very dangerous for melees to just, pretty much standing there, because it does do a lot of damage, especially when it's raging, so you need to be very careful to keep your distance.
Yeah, and it looks like they are once again waited for that Blade Storm to go off before they procced him into raging, and we're probably going to see them just try to DPS him down before the next Blade Storm cast here. Very, very good patience out of them, just making sure they're dealing with this room clean, making sure that they're not having any deaths. That seems to be kind of the style of Full Send here. It almost kind of ruined their run last dungeon, but as long as they don't have any catastrophic mistakes like what happened on the final boss in Temple, they're looking pretty good in this dungeon so far.
Yeah, Black Mamba did manage to kill a boss, and they're now on the event too. Now, they did the same pull as Full Send. They did pull those 2 golems on top of this event to save time. Now, if they actually do some riskier pulls here, which they have to catch up. Now the problem though in King's Rest is that the dungeon is pretty straightforward. There's not that many like crazy pulls you can do except on the bridge later on, and that is just very dangerous to do.
Yeah, we didn't really mention this last pack here. It's kind of one of the easiest packs to deal with. The Queen will just shoot random players in the group. Actually, she'll shoot the tank, generally speaking. The most dangerous part, however, is that when you pull it initially, since there's no aggro target or threat right when she spawns, she'll shoot one random player in the group. So that can do a lot of damage to a DPS. If they happen to take damage from anything else, they could go down. But nobody went down there.
Yeah, fun fact, actually, in this last pack, they will spawn pools beneath players that slow you. Now, in the past, they would actually scale with the level of the dungeon. The slow would scale with the level. And at some point, when you did a high-level King's Rest, you would just literally be immobile and just standing there. So the only way to get out was to blink or to have a disengage or something like that.
Now we do see another thing for the Frost Mage here. This is going to be one of those pulls where Frost Mages will do a lot of damage here. They can kite pretty effectively with the Blizzard and the slow here. Not that they necessarily need to. Now, one of the biggest problems being a Frost Mage or a caster on this pull is these green pools tend to favor ranged players. So you're pretty much in a constant flux of movement. So unless he actually takes the instant cast Blizzard trait while you have a Frozen Orb out, he's not going to be doing that much AoE damage here. Now, we see him casting Blizzard, so he doesn't have that talent, but he still is topping damage with that Frozen Orb spam.
Yeah, so the mage actually being very mean to the melees here. Just as you said, those pools spawn on ranged players, but the mage was just going in melee constantly, spawning those pools around, so the melee had to dodge too. So the mage was just saying, you know what, guys, if I have to dodge them, you have to dodge them too.
Right, and we do also see this double construct pull coming out, pretty standard for most teams. The thing about these constructs is they will entomb players randomly, but where they will entomb the player depends on what part of the room they're on. So, if you go to the right side of the room, they will always entomb player in the far right tomb, so you can kind of spam click that tomb. The biggest problem with this pack is you need to make sure you pull them with enough time apart so that it doesn't try to entomb two players at the same time. Otherwise, some weird things can happen.
Yeah, so you definitely don't want to have two players entombed at the same time. One thing to mention here, the full send is on 59% trash, meaning if one of the constructs dies here, they will trigger the reaping. So what they're going to try to do is kill those two constructs pretty much at the same time. The problem, of course, is that they're both going to be raging at the same time too. So the tank needs to be a little bit careful here, but the goal is to get the healer out of combat, as we can see him sitting down to drink here, to get some mana back, and now they're going to pull the reaping on top of the boss.
And once again, the mage, also one of those scaling exponential AoE classes. The more AoE there is, the more frozen orbs they get off. So we'll see them doing a lot of damage here. Unfortunately, the rogues just kind of stole all the AoE damage from the mage, so we're not going to see too much out of them there. But moving on to the Embalmer here. What are the main mechanics we're looking for on this fight?
Okay, so one of the main mechanics, as we can see, is this fire spawning here in the ground, right? Now, it is a pretty big pool, and you also need to walk out of it really fast when it spawns, because the damage triggers really quickly. So if you stand there, finish your cast, then you're probably going to die. So you need to make sure you walk out fast, and also the location of it is pretty important, because you don't want to cut off one side of the room to the other because of the entomb that the boss casts here too.
Right, like you mentioned, the entomb works pretty similar to how the constructs we saw before they pulled the boss work. However, they aren't tied to the side of the room. They can pick any of the four tombs around the room, and the player that gets entombed will have a button to spam, which will kind of make the tomb shake a little bit. Now, usually we'll see teams kind of split up across the room so that they'll have one person close to the left tomb, one person close to the right tomb, so that they'll be able to easily get them out. Because there is a punishing mechanic for not getting someone out quickly. The boss will start pulsing AoE on everyone in the group.
Yeah, and he will open coffins himself, and he will spawn skeletons that actually are very scary to deal with. We don't want to have those skeletons spawn, so it's very crucial that you get the players out as fast as possible. And we see one more mechanic this boss has is the Drain Fluids, which will target a random player, and it will pretty much channel a single target debuff that does ticking damage. So the healer needs to make sure that he heals his debuff away, and when it expires and it will put like a grievous effect on you, that will reduce your damage done, and it will slow you too on top of that. So the healer needs to make sure that at the very end, when the debuff is about to run out, that he has like a big heal left, so he can get rid of this grievous effect.
Right, kind of the wombo combo we'll sometimes see is he'll do a Drain Fluids on somebody, then instantly do this Burn Corruption cast, which makes it hard for you to move out if you don't have a move speed increase or a blink. Fortunately, it went on the mage there, so he could just blink out of it if it was on top of him. there's not too much other than that to deal with. The boss just kind of does a cyclical mechanic. You do kind of start running out of space in the room, but I believe that the fire starts despawning before the room fills up. So as long as you leave yourself a path to get to the other side of the room, there's not too much to worry about on this fight. Just live through the drained fluids, make sure you're getting people out of tombs, and they're at 10% here. The boss will go down pretty clean here.
Yeah, so they actually didn't have the Bloodlust ready on Full Send's side when they pulled the boss with the Reaping, but they did get Bloodlust up back in the middle of the fight, and they popped it. Now on Black Mamba's side, they actually did not use their Bloodlust. They have it ready, so that means they're probably gonna save it for a pull later, which is interesting because usually on Tyrannical you do want to use that Bloodlust on the bosses because they just have so much HP, and it just takes such a long time to burn through this HP.
We did see this variation from one of the teams last week rather. I don't remember which team it was. I want to say it was Method EU, where they actually saved their Bloodlust to do a very large pull in the start of this gauntlet right after the boss. But I don't remember it actually saving them much time, so it's going to be interesting to see where they plan on using that Bloodlust, whether they're using it for trash after the boss or whether they're just saving it for cooldowns. We do see a pretty small safe pull coming out from Full Send, and this kind of just seems to be the trend for them. They're not doing anything too crazy, too spectacular, but they're doing it clean, making sure they have no deaths. Usually, they're somewhat clean, and they're just doing it clean.
Well, one thing to mention though here, that these pulls, it looks like a smaller pull, but they are actually very scary, those packs. So we see the tank dropping very, very low because of this bleed, and on top of just having the raging, right? If you pull those mobs that are so scary, especially the Berserker, right? The Berserker puts the bleed on the closest target. So usually it's a tank, but sometimes we can see one of those divas being on the rogues too, because the Berserker will just pretty much stack this bleed debuff on you if you keep having it in the same target. So we saw the Proud Warrior just pretty much kiting while he had this bleed on him to make sure that it goes on someone else, so it doesn't go on 2 stacks, because it's pretty much unhealable at some point, especially when the Berserkers are raging.
Yeah, and we saw how much damage that bleed did outside of raging. Imagine how much damage it would do if it were also raging at the same time. This is definitely one of the more dangerous mobs in the dungeon to do, but of course having that Resto Druid with Soothe available to them, it'll make it so that they don't have too much to worry about here. Just one more leap instead of debuffs here, and then they'll just be on their way to the next trash bag.
Yeah, then of course we have those Hexers here as well, which will cast a Spectral Bolt, which is a lot of tank damage too, and to make sure to interrupt as much as possible. Now, one thing to note, that they also cast a Hex, which is not actually very important for a Full Send to interrupt, because they have the Resto Druid and they have the Mage who can both dispel the Hex because it's a curse. So good on them to, pretty much they can focus everything on the Spectral Bolts, just go letting the Hexes through, and they can just dispel them immediately.
Nothing to mention, we were speculating about it earlier. We do see Black Mamba using their Bloodlust on the first pull right after the second boss here. We did see how low it brought Full Send whenever they pulled it, but
it's the same pull, right?
It's the exact same pull. They're just going to do it a little bit faster and maybe a little safer with Bloodlust. They might have had some problems with this pull in practice, and they just decided to band-aid fix it with Bloodlust, because if you're using Bloodlust this early, you will get it again later on in the dungeon due to the length of the third boss on Tyrannical. So I don't know if I like that. It's probably just a safety thing for them.
Yeah, as I said, they probably just had trouble with this pull, and we saw Full Send, having some problems too. Tanks dropping very, very low, but they did manage to recover. Now we do see Full Send just moving on to the next pulls. There's new mobs, the Beastmaster, which you also have to look out for. Just some very scary casts. One of them is pretty much a poison cone that targets one random member of your group. Now you need to make sure that you move accordingly, because the cone will pretty much pierce anyone. So if you're standing in a bad spot and it will hit all of your members, then a poison debuff will get applied, and of course the healer can only dispel one of them, and it does do a lot of taking damage. So you need to make sure that either it gets interrupted, which is also possible, but only with stuns and knockbacks, or you just position yourself properly so you only get one debuff.
And of course they are pulling the one Spectral Brute, which patrols across the entire bridge here, who is kind of an annoying mob. He makes it so that there's a lot of AoE ground where you can't stand, especially in a group with melee here. Damage downtime, you can't stand in this ground crush, otherwise you get knocked up to the ceiling and have even more downtime. So it's just one of the worst mobs in the dungeon to deal with for these melee comps. I think that's kind of one of the advantages of having a mage, and although it's a small advantage, we're seeing the differences in time. That last dungeon had a 0.5 second difference.
Yeah.
These small differences are going to add up.
Yeah, we see the heal actually being pretty much completely out of mana on full send side, so they need to make sure to get out of combat here after this brute, let the healer drink up a little bit. Now, I'm not sure if they will try to do a skip here, or if they're actually playing these mobs, as we see the rogue just going forward, just distracting some of those mobs here.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to see what the rest of the group is doing here. Unfortunately, we don't really get to see that. It looks like the rogue is, I mean, we can't really see what the rest of the group is. There they are. They have a shroud. It looks like they're, okay, it's going to blind one of the berserkers and only pull the other berserker so that they don't have too much tank damage going out here. That's pretty smart from them. That takes this pull it looks like it has a lot of mobs in it, but the 2 headhunters die almost instantly due to having less health than everything else. And it lets you deal with one of the berserkers separately so that you don't have to deal with too many of them at the same time, because they're going to get that first berserker in the AoE pull down pretty quickly, and then you'll get the second one to raging afterwards, so the soothe cooldown will come back up for its raging.
Yeah, pretty smart pull by them. Now the only question is, are they going to pull in this next berserker into this group, or because everything is kind of that. So what are they going to do with this berserker? Are they going to skip it completely, just shadow melt it, or are they going to pull it into the boss fight, which, you know, it's pretty dangerous, especially in Tyrannical, because this next fight is very difficult to handle.
Yeah, I don't know about pulling it into the boss. I would have imagined they would have pulled it once they killed the first berserker so that they only had the 2 up, but it looks like they're just going to either kill it solo or CC it again later. I believe the last mob gives somewhere between, I think, about 4%, which would put them at 100%, the last mini-boss before the 4th boss. So that they're probably just going to keep that CC'd and move on to the rest of the dungeon. Moving on to the 3rd boss here, this council is one of the most interesting dungeon bosses in the game.
Yeah, so this boss, not only does it last very long on Tyrannical, but there's 3 different bosses that you have to fight. Depending on the week, there will be a different rotation on live servers. Of course, on the tournament realm, it will be a set rotation, starting with the most dangerous boss out of them all, which is Kula. Now, Kula does do those the whirlwind pretty much, as we can see right now, that spawns whirling blades on the floor. They will continue to rotate and go further and further out of the room. Now, all you have to do with those is to dodge them. So this is not a very dangerous mechanic unless it overlaps with something else. But there's one more dangerous ability that this boss casts, is the axe that we can see being casted on one of the rogues right here. Now, this is a 20-second debuff. It lasts very, very long, and it does a lot of damage, especially on Tyrannical, as we can just see his HP dropping so low.
Yeah, and the thing to mention about this boss is while the mechanics themselves aren't that difficult, when you move on to the 2nd and 3rd bosses later into the fight, the old bosses kind of respawn and do one of their mechanics. So, for instance, later on in the fight, at random, Kula will spawn and do one of these AoE whirlwinds that people will have to dodge. We do see Demise proccing his cheat death there and actually going down to the debuff. That's just so much damage to deal with. So we see teams, I mean, on live servers, especially pushing high keys, we'll see teams use save their bloodlust for this boss, even if it's the 3rd boss on the week, because of how dangerous it is.
Oh no,
this rogue is also going incredibly low. He has the Berserker debuff. They didn't shadow meld the Berserker, so that the Berserker came down after being CC'd, and he also goes down and has his cheat death go down. That's 2 deaths. That's 2 battle reses.
So the problem was the first rogue that died actually got hit by one of those whirling blades on top of having the axe debuff from the boss. So if you get hit by the whirling blade, which I said earlier is it's not hard to avoid, but apparently, you know, melee brain. So it was very hard for he did get hit by this bleeding debuff on top of the axe. It was too much damage for the healer to heal away, and once this rogue died, he probably did have to CC in the Berserker, and if you die while you have an active CC, the CC will actually break. So no one really thought about the CC back there. We had the Berserker come in, put the bleed on the rogue on top of the axe, and we have 2 more bleeds on the tank here. The tank goes down. They have no reses left. It's going to be a full team wipe for full send here.
Yeah, they committed all 3 of their battle reses to the DPS, and now all the DPS are alive with no tank and healer to keep them up.
Oh no.
And look on the side of Black Mamba, they're already onto the 2nd boss. They already dealt with Kula the Butcher. So they're on the 2nd boss, Zanzo Lawise here, whose major mechanic is to spawn these 4 totems in 4 corners of the room. Now, of the 4 totems, the most dangerous one is the Explosive Totem, which, if its cast gets off, will do massive AoE damage to the group. The other 3 totems, while of less importance, will also need to be dealt with. One of them puts a Refreshing Shield on the boss, which makes it not able to take damage. Another one will do a Thundering Cast, which will interrupt everyone in the group if they're casting an ability at the end of its cast. And the other one is just kind of Area of Denial around the room, which will knock you around if you get hit by it.
Yeah, and one more ability that this boss has is the Poison Nova, of course, that she will continue to cast even if she's dead. She will spawn randomly in the room and cast this Poison Nova. So it's very crucial to interrupt that, because if you don't, then there will be a poison debuff on the whole group. Not only does it do a lot of initial damage, but it also does ticking damage afterwards. So very crucial to interrupt this. As we see on the other side, Full Send just having this full team wipe now, trying to get back to the room. I'm not sure if there's going to be any reaping mobs that they skipped that they will have to re-kill, but definitely just a disaster for Full Send. They're going to lose so much time here.
Yeah, the important thing to remember about this dungeon is because they didn't deal with this construct on the bridge here, they didn't unlock the waypoint where they can kind of talk to the guy at the front to teleport to this bridge, so they have to run all the way around through the entire dungeon, and they do end up just pulling the construct anyways. I don't know if the tank didn't have an invis or if they didn't have a shroud for that, but that's definitely going to be some deaths unless they decide to commit their shadow melds there. Black Mamba is now moving on to the third and final boss, Akali the Conqueror.
Yeah, so this very last boss doesn't really have a lot of dangerous mechanics. We see one of the mechanics here is the barrel through. It will target one of the players, which is not a tank, and then just pretty much put a big arrow on top of you. After the duration is over, it will charge to this player, and depending on how many members he hit while charging to the player, it will do splitting damage pretty much. So you want to make sure that your whole group soaks this barrel through. You can also just you can immune it, right? But it doesn't really do that much damage, even in Tyrannical. If everyone soaks it, it's pretty easy on the healers to just heal up the damage, because there's no other group damage happening except, of course, tank damage.
Yeah, one of the most interesting ways I've seen people deal with that barrel through mechanic, I've seen some people have their monks put their little port on top and then jump off for the barrel through, which would cause them to take no damage because they're not technically on the platform, and then they'll port back up afterwards. Obviously, they're so far ahead. They've got everyone alive. They've got 2 of their battle reses. They're not really in any danger, so they don't have to do any crazy plays like that. But it's just kind of one of the things you can do, one of the variations you can make in this dungeon, which is kind of interesting to me.
You can also jump off and wild charge back up as a druid. I did not try that myself because I was scared and I don't really like gravity so much. But now we have Black Mamba actually killing off this boss. They have 2% left trash. Now, the last mini boss, as you mentioned, gives approximately 4%. So they did overkill a little bit of trash because the last mini boss needs to be killed. You have to kill the last mini boss to be able to access the last boss. And that one is actually pretty dangerous. Now, it's not fortified, so it gets a bit easier because of that. But this mini boss actually does do raging, so the healer needs to be very fast on dispelling that one.
I don't know why, but I feel like I'm back in Oldir right now. I don't know what's going on. The Shadow of Zul is giving me flashbacks to a weird time. But yeah, dealing with the Shadow of Zul, this is one of the weirdest kind of mini bosses in the game. It does a lot of shadow damage to the tanks here, so like the warrior, I mean, doesn't have too much mitigation against that, but like you said, it's not fortified, he's not really in too much danger. He does a lot of mechanics similar to Zul from the Oldir raid. So he has these pools on the ground that one player will go out to soak. If you don't soak that pool, it will do AoE pulsing damage to the group. But when you're soaking it, it does more damage to you. In addition to that, he'll target one player. You can see that going on the rogue there with a massive AoE damage. He just kind of has to run away from the group because it does a drop-off damage, as you see him going away there. And once again, this is a reaping instance. So once he gets below 30%, he starts doing a lot more damage. The tank just seesawing with his health there.
It took him so long to dispel the raging off here. This boss was actually raging for approximately 5 to 10 seconds. We saw the tank just drop very, very low. I'm not sure if the healer just forgot about it or what exactly happened there, but we saw the tank actually almost just dying to this. Now, they did proc the reaping wave here with the 100% trash. We see them waiting here, which is weird. I'm not sure if they just don't have their Shadow Meld ready. Maybe it's just a tank that doesn't have it ready and just dies and gets rest back up. That's probably what they're doing. Now, that's one choice to make. They could also just choose to pull it on top of the boss if they just don't have the Shadow Meld ready in the tank. But they choose to just lose the tank, give the 5-second penalty and just use the Revitalize, which, is of course safer, right? Because if you have the Reaping Wave on top of the boss, on a Tyrannical boss, then, it is scary.
Yeah, I mean, once again, we've mentioned this so many times. All these teams have 2 monitors. They know what's going on with the other teams, so they definitely knew how far ahead they were. So they just decided to go for the safe play. Take the 5-second loss plus the rest timer. Make sure you keep your battle reses for the boss. Make sure you're playing safe. I mean, even right now on the side of Full Send, we see that they have a DPS down, but they can't even choose to reset the boss because they don't have a battle res, and they're already a third of the way through the fight, so it wouldn't be efficient for them to reset and keep going. So moving on to King Dazar here, this is kind of like I wouldn't say it's a phased fight, it's more that things happen at different percentages. So the first thing that happens in this fight is that 80% King Dazar will spawn his first ad, which kind of jumps to random players and does this hunting leap similar to the Raptors earlier in the dungeon. It's a frontal AoE cone of physical damage that does a lot of damage if you stand in it.
Yeah, so you definitely don't want to stand in Urban's frontal cleave. Then when the boss reaches 60%, he will spawn his second ad, where the boss will pretty much just mount on top of this raptor, and the damage will be split, or the damage will be redirected to the ad. Now, the difficult part about that fight, that part of the fight, is that the raptor actually just have fear, a group fear. Now, this can be dangerous because of all those tornadoes, as you can see them go around the room. Because if you do get hit by those tornadoes, you get, as we see the Restored and the Monk actually having a debuff from the tornado, it does ticking damage, and quite a bit, especially on Tyrannical. So it is dangerous if you have the fear on top of just, getting hit by those tornadoes.
So like you mentioned, this is probably the most dangerous part of the fight. The second raptor at Zala, he will cast an AoE fair on the group, which is undodgeable unless you have Cloak of Shadows as a rogue, of course.
Or Tremor Totem.
Or Tremor Totem, but I don't think we did see one Shaman.
Yeah.
But moving onwards, that will AoE for the entire group, which, like you said, can move you into these wind slashes, which is another amount of physical damage. We see both rogues getting hit by a wind here. Once this raptor does go down and the boss hits 40%, we will see spikes spawn around the room. It's sort of a last-ditch effort to get you to die.
Yeah, so the spikes there's two patterns pretty much. They will be random. It's either the spikes that spawn in one location, it's a set location, and they will always go counterclockwise, or they spawn in a pattern that will change up every time.
It's sort of like a spokes on a bike wheel pattern where they'll swap spots every now and then, so you just kind of have to move back and forth. Now, obviously, the better pattern to get would be the one on the circle, like you mentioned, because you can kind of just stand behind it and let it go around the entire room. But neither of them are particularly difficult to deal with. The main thing that we're dealing with as this fight goes on are these wind gusts that spawn more and more of them throughout the fight. These gale slashes, rather. He targets a player, pinpoints their location, that goes out to where that player was, and then goes in a circle around the room. So you have a lot of these circles going in different counterclockwise and clockwise patterns. You need to make sure you're not getting hit by them, otherwise you just take extra damage.
Yeah, so one of the other abilities come in here as well from King Dazar, which is this leap. As we've seen, one of the rogues drop very, very low, so he will pretty much target a player, and after a couple of seconds he will leap towards this player. Now, he will pretty much lock in your position at the very end when he starts leaping, and then the impact point will do the most damage. The further you go away from the impact point, it will do less damage. So the rogue dropped so low because he walked out, and then when the boss was leaping on him, he was just standing still, so he actually almost died to it.
And we did see them get that circular pattern first, and now we see them kind of getting the spoke pattern where they have to move back and forth. Like we said, neither of them are particularly difficult to deal with, but they are area of denials. If you get targeted by the leap mechanic, you don't have that far to move. We do see the tank dropping very, very low to that last blade combo, but I think they would have been fine. They have 3 battle reses to deal with here. As King Dazar goes down at 1% HP, Black Mamba taking it 2-0.
Another 2-0 victory here on the board as Black Mamba does take it and sends full send down into that lower bracket here. Overall, I mean, this was kind of what we were expecting here, Sours. We were having that kind of sloppy gameplay coming around, and some of those early wipes just really kind of plaguing Black Mamba, even though they did win.
I think to say this is what we were expecting is kind of cruel to both of these teams. It was definitely not what you want to see in a dungeon, where these wipes, they're so costly, especially the wipe that full set ended up happening. This Black Mamba wipe where the healer just goes down to the debuff, and then look at how quickly they called the wipe after that. I don't quite know where that other rogue ends up wandering off to, but once the healer's dead here, there's no coming back. But this wipe from Full Send was just so heartbreaking for the poor Australians, where Spectral Berserker got loose, I guess didn't have anything really to keep him out of the fight, and it just kind of spiraled their boss out of control. And the run back from wiping to this boss is very long. So since both teams are playing Alliance, there's that small pack of those little crawly, shadowy guys that you can't mass dispel or kill in any sort of reasonable way. So they have everyone's got to release, they've got to shroud back, and they've got to ride the pterodactyl back to the thing. They cost so much time. We saw they were still re-killing that boss when Black Mamba was defeating the final boss. It was a devastating wipe.
Yeah, very tough for them to actually deal with. And even on that wipe Full Send had on Kula the Butcher, it kind of just seemed like they couldn't really decide on what they had to actually kill. They seemed like they were just kind of tunneling down Zyronic, the Butcher, as the Berserker stacked up 2 onto the tank and then started working on other people at the same time.
Yeah, it was really weird. I noticed, like, as we were going through the boss there, that Black Mamba caught up and actually passed them up while they were kind of just sitting there going through their battle reses. It looked like they were, like, lost a little bit. Like, oh, do we have stuff to deal with the Berserkers here, or do we not? Like, they didn't quite know exactly what they were doing there.
Yeah, and I guess all they would have would be maybe 2 blinds to be able to try to alternate if there's no dots onto them. But it really hasn't been the first time that we've seen any of the Shadow Milled skips or anything like that be the bane of these other teams there. So with Full Send going on to that lower bracket, we are, Nagura, going to be seeing the game coming up with Battle for Champion versus the other winners that we had earlier, Buff Warrior, Nerf Rogue here. And in the first round, I think we're going to be having on Underout.
Okay, so it's going to be the first time seeing Underout here, which will be interesting, and especially those 2 teams, they did have a little bit of, they did struggle a little bit earlier in their matches, but, maybe Underout, maybe they pull out something different, as we have seen teams before pulling out the DK in Underout. So interesting to see if we're going to see that again here from the Eastern region.